And welcome to today's top story. We are sort of taking a moment the last couple of weeks to look back 2018 with our political leaders to see how they felt about their accomplishments, things that they want to do, things that they feel they still need to do. Joining us is Ross Romano, who's our MPP, and Merry Christmas, first of all.
Merry Christmas, Luann. And almost Happy New Year.
Almost Happy New Year,
and Merry
yes.
Christmas to everyone at home. I hope everyone's enjoyed the season. It's been relatively mild out there. I woke up again this morning and 3 degrees. I can't say that I was disappointed without having to clean any snow since I returned back home.
That's a good thing.
Something to be grateful for right now.
Absolutely.
Sault Ste. Marie, absolutely. No,
Yeah,
it's been a great year. It's been so excited to be back home again right now.
No doubt. Tell me about your year so far. Like the 2018, it's been active for you.
It has been. It has been. We started off 2018 last January, obviously with a lot of changes in our party, going into a provincial general election. There was a lot of challenges to deal with respect to having been a newly elected MPP. There was a lot of issues in our community. Probably the biggest one I can recall after being elected last June in the by-election was the situation with ONNtv. The bid process we had with ONNtv, there was certainly significant concerns raised by the ONNtv executives to me right after the election that we were not going to be able to compete as a city in the Ferrochrome Processing Facility bid process. Of course, you're aware, 4 cities bid. We've been reduced to the final 2. But as of June of 2017, we weren't even in the mix. And so I spent countless hours over the last summer, after getting elected to remedy that issue, and was very grateful that by the end of the summer, the ONNtv group was very confident in their ability to include Sault Ste. Marie in the bid process. And that was the first challenge we had to remedy, and doing so from opposition was definitely a challenge. Then, of course, you have an election process, and coming through that election process, it was obviously very close, very, very close race here in Sault Ste. Marie, and I was very grateful for the opportunity to continue to serve. And right out of the gates, we had Algoma Steel restructuring, had been going on for 3 prior years, since November of 2015. We had the HCR line. There had been well over a year of talks of them potentially pulling the plug, and with it some 40 to 50 jobs at Sault Ste. Marie alone, and that 288-kilometer stretch of rail line, from here to Sudbury was potentially going to be lost. And within the first few months of being elected, I'm very, very proud to say that we got Algoma Steel resolved, and the results of that will be very, very shortly coming forward. With respect to the exact details, there was a lot of provincial involvement in that process. And HCR we were able to resolve. And I think what's really the most critical thing that I'm very proud of is that we were able to resolve those files without breaking the bank, so to speak. We were able to do it in a very cost-effective way to ensure that we still have those services here in Sault Ste. Marie. We still have our steel plant. We still have the HCR line. But we haven't had to break the bank of the taxpayers in doing so. Those were 2 of the biggest challenges, along with ONNtv, from a job development perspective. But we've also been putting a lot of time and effort into our healthcare situation that we have. We've made some very significant investments here in Sault Ste. Marie at our hospital. Initially in October, there was an announcement for $1.72 million, which created 16 new beds in our hospital, surge beds. And then just last Friday announced another $605,000 for 10 more beds, which, as indicated by the interim CEO of the hospital, Ms. Watson, we're now in a situation where we're no longer operating over capacity at our hospital.
Boy, that's been years, hasn't it?
That's been years. It has been years. So, when I look at 6 months since the election and roughly 18 months or so since first elected, and I think the first 18 months was really gearing up towards the most recent election this past June. But certainly in those 6 months, I'm very confident of the work we've done so far, and pretty proud of what we've done to date. Certainly there's been challenges, and it's been a struggle, but I am very excited to be home right now. I was just mentioning to you before we started, the most exciting feeling I ever had was when the wheels hit the tarmac last Thursday night. I was so happy to be home. Yes.
Right.
It was nice to be home. It's very, very good to be home and spend some quality time with family and friends, and get to enjoy a Greyhound game or 2 over the break. And I've missed quite a few of them since getting elected. It's been a little bit difficult because all of my time is obviously in Toronto, or the majority of it. So.
What kind of, you mentioned the challenges. You know, it's awesome to look back at the year and look at big, scary situations like SR's settled and HCR. What's the status now? Is it permanently?
HCR has 1 year.
Right.
We've got a grace period of a year to continue to work on that file, and that is something that certainly from my perspective and the perspective of our caucus and our government, we did not want to look at HCR as merely something where we wanted to do some type of corporate welfare handout, because we saw that in the last 5 to 7 years, and we don't want to continue down that path. We want to make sure that that business is economically viable moving forward. We want to make sure they have the tools, and we want to make sure all businesses have the tools they need to succeed, and that's no different for HCR. This $980,000 expenditure by the provincial government through the NOHFC fund allows us to continue to look at ways to make that business more competitive moving forward.
Are you confident?
I feel good.
Yeah,
I feel
do you?
good. I feel good. The more I've spoken to other businesses in the area, I see there is an appetite from other businesses to be able to use the HCR line, but there are some infrastructure expenditures that need to be looked at, and I think we can make it viable, certainly moving forward. And I think the more we see our economics improving in the north, the more the argument for a business like HCR becomes all the more strong by having a greater competitive marketplace.
Now, there are times where your leader, Doug Ford, it is so, he's such a present person.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
like when he's in
Absolutely.
the room, everybody knows he's in the room.
Absolutely.
So good, bad, or indifferent, that's just a fact. Is that something that is easy for you as like a newcomer, a member of his team? Do you feel like you're being heard by him?
Absolutely. Our premier, Doug Ford, is definitely one of those personalities, and you know, there's the person you see obviously with all of us on television, and who we see when we're in caucus on a daily basis going into question period, and he is such a team first personality. He's just an incredible character, a lot of fun to be around, does a great job of motivating our group. I feel he does possess those qualities of a leader that people can rally behind. People feel like they're being heard, and people feel like an important and integral part of the team. And I've appreciated him in that role since we got there. You know, when we look back to this last election, this election was a statement election. We had an election where you saw the governing party reduced to 7 seats, not even party status. You saw, you know, an opportunity in this last election for a party like the NDP that they hadn't seen since the 1990 election, and you saw the people of Ontario vote largely in favor of a conservative government, and they were speaking very clearly to the fact that they want to see the financial affairs of this province taken into account on a more serious basis. They want to see people take control. They want to see a government that will take control of our finances. Our debt, our deficit is extraordinary. It's staggering in this province. You probably heard I was a part of this select committee on financial transparency. We heard from some of the foremost experts in forensic accounting in the entire country who stated that our province today is in a worse financial position than we were during the 2008 recession. And that seems to be lost on too many people, and I think through the election, we saw a lot of those people stand up and say, no, we need to take control of our finances. And to have a person like Premier Doug Ford at the helm, who looks at those taxpayer dollars, looks at every penny of those taxpayer dollars and says, what can we do to get more for our people? What can we do to put more money in people's pockets? That has been, I think, a welcoming piece of what our government has become to the province, and it's been a lot of fun working in that environment. It's been a lot of work. It's been certainly constant since the election, but which makes times like Christmas all the more enjoyable to sit down and relax with family and friends.
I'm sure
been fun.
it's so busy. I can't even imagine. And then there are big issues. You talk about the finances of the province, because of course that's something that we're all very concerned about.
Absolutely.
And then the Northern Ontario issues that you mentioned earlier, SR Steel, the HCR, that sort of thing. Sex education provincially has been a huge topic this last year or so. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like it should go back to, because we have numbers now that indicate that people think it should be back to a much more broad sense of sex education?
Well, I think when people raised the concerns they raised over the sex ed curriculum aspect of the education curriculum, I understand. I get where parents' concerns are. There hadn't been a lot of changes for quite some time to the curriculum leading up to the 2014 changes. I can appreciate where those concerns come from. However, having been a candidate who knocked on every door in the by-election 3 times, and then knocked on every door again in the general election, we're talking about 120,000 plus doors over the course of 18 months. Having heard from the people of our community here in Sault Ste. Marie, I would say they knew that these changes were coming if we were going to be elected into government.
Do you think people were aware of that?
I think we made
dramatic.
I think we made it very clear that we would be reviewing the education curriculum on the whole, and that certainly that component would be something we would be visiting. I believe that was made crystal clear by our government during the campaign process. But what people were saying was that they wanted to make sure their kids were protected, but they wanted to make sure as parents their wishes were being respected. And what we saw in the last curriculum change, there was something like less than 1,600 total parents across all of Ontario had submitted into this process, into this consultation process. That's just not enough. That's not a fair or accurate depiction of the population of Ontario. And to say that we wanted to make changes is one thing, but to be able to actually listen to people and hear their thoughts, hear their concerns, give them the opportunity to be a part of the new curriculum, I think is important. As politicians, and this is something that was very easy for myself to buy into, I always found before I entered politics, what does the politician specifically know about area X, Y, or Z? We want to look at the experts. So if we're talking about health or education, that's not my expertise. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in that area, but it's important to listen to the experts. And who are the most important experts there are about how to raise our children and how to educate our children, but the parents. And so we've taken a very parent-first approach to the curriculum, and it's not just about one area. It's not only about same-sex curriculum. There is numerous areas to our education curriculum.
Well, like bullying, cyberbullying, and because our kids,
Absolutely.
Your kids and my kids and their kids, sense of the world is so much different than when we grew up. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have YouTube.
Absolutely.
And so that's a big, big issue.
No, I think we're forever dealing with a situation where we want to make sure our children are protected, and we want to make sure our children have access to the most up-to-date learning materials. We want to make sure that our teachers, our educators have access to the most up-to-date and the best possible ways of teaching our kids. What we have seen, we went through this discovery math phase over the course of the last several years. We're seeing our math scores fall tremendously in Ontario. Grade 6 students failing basic math skills. This is not acceptable. We cannot be a place where our children are not performing at the absolute highest standard across this entire country. That is a hallmark that we ought to be known for, that we want to be known for. We have a lack of financial literacy education in our system right now. Everybody coming out of high school can go get a credit card paying 20 some odd percent interest payments per month. At what point in time do you have to learn about those things? These are all areas we want to teach our kids. We want to teach our kids about financial literacy. We want to teach our kids to be better students. We want to teach our kids to be better at math skills. We want to teach our kids to not be afraid of the skilled trades. Coming into this community initially as a city councillor, well, obviously was in the community, but entering politics as a city councillor, And then in my first term as an opposition member of government, I consistently heard people talk about a lack of jobs. And that was one of my fundamental platform issues, was we needed to create more jobs in our community. Having been in government now for the last not quite 6 months, I cannot believe how many employers I speak to on a regular and ongoing basis who have jobs. They just can't fill them. And so there's some initiatives we're working on within our office right now to try to address that issue, and I'm very excited about what we're planning, but it's still a bit early, so I'll be releasing that more in the new year. Hopefully by the end of January, beginning of February, we'll have a launch of a plan that we have to address that on a local issue. But I don't want to detract from the question or move away from the education question. Is the same-sex curriculum or sex ed curriculum aspect of education important? Absolutely it is. And it's gone through the consultation process. We've had one of the largest, most robust consultation processes this province has ever seen. It recently concluded. We are now compiling that data and we'll be rolling out the new education curriculum. But it's not going to be specific to that one issue. It's going to deal with all of the issues of our children's education.
As it should be. It should be broad.
Absolutely.
It has to be.
And I think the most fundamental tenet has to be that our principal priority is the protection of our children and respecting our parents. We need to understand that parents deserve a say in how their children are educated. I don't think there's anybody better out there than the parents first.
Now, with regards to policy, and because we're talking about sex ed, but any policy really, we had that one poll result that really indicated this particular result, that the majority of the people, like into the 90 percentile, want to go back to, a more broad education system. Because we're talking about that, any other issue, is there a time when the government would take a look at the numbers and think, okay, we gotta go with what people want?
Well, that's the purpose of the consultation process we went through. That was it. We heard far too many people speaking during, at least in my case, in the by-election campaign and the most recent campaign, parents saying we never had a say in this new education curriculum. We never had an opportunity to cast our vote, if you will, to provide our feedback and our thoughts. Why didn't we get that opportunity? And with the level of criticism we were seeing of that previous education curriculum, we obviously made the decisions we did to go in a different direction. We started a consultation process. We are compiling that data now, and that is what we will be rolling out. We will be rolling out a process that is a parents' first consultation. That will be the focus of the legislation.
Do you have a timeline on that?
I can't say at this point in time, but again, I'm not the expert in that field, but we have an amazing Minister of Education in Lisa Thompson. I've gotten to know her very well over the last couple of years, and I trust her abilities absolutely, and I suspect we'll be seeing something fairly new in the new year, with respect to that.
Now, we've talked about such big issues this morning,
Certainly.
like just for Sault Ste. Marie and the Algoma region, provincially as well, finances, education, farming, all of those issues. Do you feel like because you're dealing with these huge issues that you have time to touch base with your constituents?
We try to make sure that is a priority at all times. Can it be difficult? Absolutely. I spend 4 to 5 days a week in Toronto at Queen's Park. That's obviously where my principal office is located. But I believe I have an amazing staff here in Sault Ste. Marie. We communicate daily. Our offices are meshed, if you will, into one between Toronto and Sault Ste. Marie offices. There's always events that I'm attending on a weekly basis. We have my schedule filled usually 2 weeks in advance for every Friday that I'm in the Soo, and often a lot of Saturdays and Sundays as well, to have client appointments, meetings with constituents. We have a very open door policy. Anybody who wants a meeting with me, I ensure that they get that meeting. There's really no exception to that rule, and I feel very confident in the level of service that our office provides to the public. And there's an old saying from when I practiced law, and it goes into politics, and it really works in every single profession there is. You're nothing without great staff, and I would not be able to accomplish what I've been able to accomplish for the community if it wasn't for the amazing staff I have at both my offices here locally in the Soo and also in Toronto. So I owe them a huge debt of gratitude for all the work they do and putting up with me on a regular basis and making sure that our community has access to great provincial services locally.
You know, it's interesting to watch as a journalist, to watch all news stories, of course, but the political picture, both at a very municipal level and then provincially and then nationally, of course. And there's so many ways that people are very creative in their criticism of their political leaders.
Yes.
For instance, you were given the gift of knowledge prior to Christmas.
I was blessed with that gift.
And what was that about?
Well, it's, as I understand it, there's been a group, I've certainly met with them individually within my office and throughout some rallies, but I think they've held 3 or 4 rallies outside of my office. Unfortunately, the majority of those rallies have been conducted while I've been in Toronto for Queen's Park sittings or other legislative business. So I have been to a couple of them where I've spoken to the group and met with them during a rally, and I think, you know, they're raising concerns. I think the group, you know, notwithstanding whether we are on the same page or not, that's not the point. I think the greater point is that you know, one of the most fundamental tenets of our democratic system is freedom of speech, obviously, and people have the right to voice their concerns, and that's the, you know, the medium they wish to use, and you know, I certainly encourage them to express themselves in however they feel fit. I would say that they've been, for the most part, very respectful of staff, and you know, they've had peaceful demonstrations outside of my office, and where possible, I've joined them and stood outside with them and tried to answer their questions to the best of my abilities. But absolutely, I encourage people to exercise their democratic rights, and certainly the right of freedom of speech is the most fundamental one we have. And I encourage them to continue to advocate for that portion of the community that they represent in their own personal interests. And I respect hearing from them. I truly do. I've said since getting elected that while you look at what your voter percentages were when you got elected, at the end of the day, it's my job to represent 50% plus one of the greater interest of our community. And that's not always difficult to do unless people are giving you that feedback. So it's important to find ways to actively solicit the feedback, and it's also important to listen to people within the community to make sure that you're getting the right feedback so that you can make the right decisions on behalf of your community and be well in tune to the issues that matter. And you know, it's
and there are times, boy, I'll tell you, with social media, that you've been aggressively called out on every word that you've said when you refer to cancer and spoiled kids. And do you feel like, boy, I gotta just watch what I say all the time?
It's a job that certainly there's no opportunity for a bad day or a mistake. There's no doubt about that. I mean, what I think sometimes gets lost on people is that when you're in this role, yes, the microphone's always on, and you're always required to be perfect, on and certainly perfect, I would say, and that's a good lesson to live by. It's something very, very positive to strive for. I was always a great fan of the Green Bay Packers and Vince Lombardi, who said, you know, you strive for perfection and you achieve excellence along the way. And that's been my strongest motivation. You know, those comments that you refer to, I would hope that people who know me and the majority of the people out there, hopefully all of the people who supported me, would know that that's not an indication of who I am in terms of my level of care for those issues. My concerns for patients who are dealing with something as serious as that are significant. We need to do better. We need to do more for all of our healthcare patients, especially our most vulnerable, and certainly that group of people would fall into that class. I don't dispute for a second that we need to do more to help those people. It's not a question of do we want to ensure that we can provide those types of treatments on a full-scale basis for all of our healthcare patients in the province. It's a question of how we get there. That's where we differ from a lot of those opposition members. I look at the motion that I was speaking to on that particular day, and it was a motion that was brought, and it was brought for political reasons. There was never an intention that that motion was ever going to be carried. The way it was phrased, the way it was put together, it was meant to be a political opportunity that was being sought on that. It was never envisioned as being something that was going to be successful. I had been speaking for 20 minutes that day in the House to that particular motion, and you get some heckling back and forth, and some of the heckling sometimes gets a bit frustrating, and I used an anecdote comparing those things to different items that you have to deal with when you're parenting, and it was a poor anecdote to use. I've since apologized. I don't think it was a fair comparison, and I think what it really made me realize, above all else, is there was a lot of people who have been dealing with cancer, who have been dealing with this terrible disease within their family, their friends, and it made them feel like I didn't care. And that wasn't the case at all. It's not a situation of not caring. In fact, it's incredibly important that we do more. Again, it's not a question of whether we do it, it's how we get there. And those comments were something that it was fair to say that it was an unfair comment, and I think it's important as a political representative to stand up and say, you know what, I erred. That's not who I am. It's not my reflection on the issue. It's incredibly important. You look at the number of people we have who have to travel to get treatment here in Sault Ste. Marie, are forced to go to Sudbury or beyond to get help. But you look at what was being proposed, and it just wasn't feasible. There was no way to be okay with simply saying, yes, we'll accept this without knowing anything about what the cost consequences are going to be, without knowing what types of medications would be covered. You were starting to get into the area of experimental medications. This wasn't, we look at healthcare, and we've got to focus on where can we make critical investments, what can we do. And for those who took that approach, I hope they would also recognize that we just did make investments in the last less than 6 months of over $2.32 million that has now addressed our hallway healthcare issue. We are now not operating over 100% capacity. So that improves areas in our healthcare system, tremendous areas across the board, from so many different areas in terms of improving our healthcare situation. When you hear that we actually had people being treated in hallways and we have this brand new hospital, that's unacceptable. I'm proud to have a new hospital. I'm sure we all as Suites are proud to have that, but how are we operating over capacity? That's not right. So being able to provide that critical funding at this time, which we did not have for several years, to be able to bring our numbers under 100% capacities is critical. It's important. We are making investments into improving our healthcare situation, but this is a situation that we need to look at. We're talking about, just to break this down, the province's budget is at just over $180 billion a year. Of that $180 billion, over $60 billion is your healthcare budget. The medications that we were referring to is over $1 billion. So we need to look at things in full perspective. We need to look at what is the size of the pot we're dealing with, what's the size of the problem provincially, and how can we address it. When we did so with respect to the surge issue, with all of the beds across, or all of the hospitals across Ontario that were dealing with an overcrowding crisis and dealing with the issue of healthcare being administered in hallways, we've addressed that, we've looked at that, and we made an initial $90 investment, and then we doubled that. Because we're starting to see, okay, well, it's still relatively new, and I'm not suggesting at all that after 6 months we're not responsible. We absolutely are critically responsible today. But we are seeing where we can make the investments, and then we're making those investments. But you need to do it on a very informed basis as opposed to a knee-jerk reaction. and that is what we're doing.
Well, we certainly appreciate the peek behind the curtain.
Thank you.
And really wish you the best of luck in 2019. And I appreciate you taking time away from your kids and your wife.
No problem.
To come and visit with us. And I'm sure folks who are watching appreciate it as well. Ross, all the best in 2019.
Thank you so much, Luann, and to you as well.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure coming in. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
We'll be back right after this.